Hello, I'm David. And I guess one of my questions was, it seemed that the crux of your argument about why the state's interested in marriage is that because children deserve both a mother and a father, and that this is the ideal. And I guess my question is, do we have any scientific evidence about that? You brought up about parents without or families without a father, but that could just as easily be explained by just the lack of two loving adults being together.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me say a couple of words in response. We now have about 40 or 50 years of robust social science showing the importance of a married mother and father for children. And what this 40 or 50-year tradition of social science has looked at is they compared the married biological mother-father intact family to several alternatives, including single parenting, including cohabitation, including divorce, and including divorce with remarriage. And only recently have they started looking at same-sex couples. So let me first speak just to those first alternatives that we have about 40 or 50 years of robust social science on. So this is the married intact biological mother-father family compared to single parenting, divorce, divorce and remarriage, and cohabitation. On more or less every factor that they could measure, the child in the married biological mother-father family has an advantage over a child in any of the alternatives, over and over and over again, with large random representative samples that were also longitudinal, so they tracked the same child throughout time. The results came back just like this. So much so that we actually saw liberal scholars willing to change their mind on this. The way that most academic change happens is that one generation of scholars die off, and then a new generation of scholars writes different articles. This was actually an interesting case where you had the cover story of the Atlantic Monthly run an article with the title, "Dan Quayle Was Right." And remember what Dan Quayle had done? He had criticized Murphy Brown and the television show for glamorizing single motherhood. And he said, we shouldn't be sending that message because while it might be the case that Murphy Brown can be successful at this, because she's a business elite, she was an anchor of a news program, and she had the financial resources to pick up the pieces herself of not having a husband or a father for her child, that if we sent this message for most Americans who don't have the luxury of money, we're setting them up for a much more challenging road in life. And he was vastly criticized for this. But then over time, as more and more of the social scientists looked at the data, they're like, wow, divorce has not been good for children. It's not been good for mothers. Cohabitation is not good for children or mothers because the man in that, it's a revolving door. He never actually commits. Even divorce and remarriage has no difference compared to just divorce. So that gets to your question about, is it the two incomes or the two people there? Even when you get the second income back in the family through divorce and remarriage, it doesn't seem to make a difference. And so then the question is, why? And so one of the things that this social scientist saw is that there are three mechanisms that seem to explain why marriage matters. It's biology, it's gender, and it's stability. And so having a biological connection with both parents to the child seems to make a difference. And this is the case because even when they look at adoption of infants, at birth, still seems to be a difference between a child being raised by their biological mother and father and then being raised by someone that's not biologically related. And they're not entirely sure of all of the reasons why. They know that mothers tend to be able to hear their own child's cry with greater sensitivity than some other child's cry. And so they don't know if it's because 9 months in the womb or because the genetics of it is that the baby's vocal cords resonate better with the mother's ear, how it works, but they know that biological connection matters. They also know that for daughters, puberty is delayed on average by about a year by having their biological father in the house than by having a biologically unrelated male in the house. It has something to do with the pheromones that are sent. Brad Wilcox has published on some of this. And this is something that social biologists are starting to look at. What are the biological explanations for this? But we know that biology matters. We then know that gender matters. And this gets to the quote that I had read you from David Popenoe, that having both a mother and a father in the household matters because mothers and fathers interact with children in distinct and complementary ways. And then we know that stability matters, and that this is why cohabitation and divorce in particular produce poor outcomes for children because they are unstable relationships, and for each transition that a child goes through, it can produce poorer outcomes, because each one of those transitions is internalized much more intensely by the child than by the adults. And we know that divorce can be traumatic for the adults, all the more so for the children. So that was more or less a consensus of social science up until about a decade ago. And then we got a series of social science studies that claimed that there were no differences with same-sex parenting and with married moms and dads. And this was interesting because it actually showed that lesbians were the best parents of all, and that a relationship with two mothers raising a child produced outcomes for children that were even better than children who were being raised by their mothers and fathers. And so this set off alarm bells for some social scientists. They said this doesn't pass the sniff test, that a child who grows up in a divorced but remarried home with a mom and a dad doesn't turn out well, but a child growing up with two moms is the same, even a little bit better. So absentee dads matter for the single mother, matter for the divorced, matter for the, don't matter for the lesbian family. They said something doesn't seem to be up with this. So they looked into these studies, and not a single one of them used large or even random samples. And so if you don't have a random sample to begin with, you can draw exactly nothing as a conclusion about the population as a whole. Only from a sample that's representative of a population can you make conclusions about the population. The methodology of most of these studies was something known as snowball sampling. They would hang up signs in bookstores or coffee shops saying, "We're conducting a study on same-sex parenting, call this number if you want to participate." And so for one of the studies, when the scholar went through and he just looked at the 44 studies that the American Psychological Association had relied on when they issued a statement saying there's no difference between same-sex parenting and married parenting, he said one of these samples, it was all upper middle-class women living in San Francisco and New York City. You know, double income, double college degrees, living in elite urban areas. From that sample, you can't draw any conclusion about a population as a whole. This is why having representative samples and then controlling for income and education and occupation matters for that 40 to 50 year consensus of social science. So then I'll say that we've now had 3 studies that have used large random representative samples. 2 of those came to the conclusion that there are differences. One was Doug Allen's study using the Canadian census data, and Canada back in 1997 started giving all of the same legal benefits to same-sex couples, and then in 2005 actually had same-sex marriage. And he saw that he just measured one outcome in particular, and it was educational achievement, and that children who were raised by parents in same-sex relationships had a significant underperformance. And he saw that it mattered whether it was a boy or a girl, and whether they were in a same-sex lesbian or a same-sex male relationship. He saw that gender mattered even here, that the lesbian relationship and the gay relationship have different outcomes for boys and for girls.
Excuse me, will you be taking further questions?
Can you not interrupt me while I'm answering that question? I'm going to finish this question, and then we're going to get to other questions. Thank you.
And we have time.
Yep, and we have half an hour, so there's no need. You will get your chance. So anyway, so the point here is that what they saw with this is that the outcomes were different, and that it mattered based upon both the gender distribution of the parents and on the children. Then there was the Mark Regnerus study. This is the study that got the most headlines and the most kind of over-the-top reaction from scholars. He did the first study that was large and random and representative. He didn't identify many same-sex couples who were in 18-year-long relationships. And he put this up front. He's like, this is one of the challenges of doing large, random, representative sampling, is that you won't find many couples like that. But he did find couples who were in same-sex relationships and who were raising kids. And then he reported what the outcomes were. And he found on, I think it was like 13 of the 20-some outcomes that he measured, there were differences. So anyway, then there's one study by a scholar at UC Berkeley, is it, or UCLA? I forget which school, Doug Rosenfeld, and he saw that there were no differences. Other scholars then said, actually, you're controlling for the differences. And so there's some dispute about the methodology there, just like there's dispute about the Regnerus methodology. All of this is to say, to the question about scientific evidence, when it comes to same-sex parenting, we know very little, because it's a relatively new phenomenon in human existence. But there's very little reason to think that the same-sex parenting relationship wouldn't follow the general pattern of what we know from 50 years of good, robust social science, that biology matters, gender matters, and stability matters.